Good morning. Today we're going to talk about two different topics. First, we're going to compare and contrast the role of government in the Mann era as compared to 2015. We're also going to address the current status of teacher expectations, both the pros and the cons. We will begin our comparison and contrast of the role of government between then and now by looking at a few things that led up to the Mann era. The Mann era is so called because of the influences of the individual whose name was Horace Mann, spelled M-A-N-N. Horace Mann was the first secretary of the Board of Education for the state of Massachusetts from 1837 to 1848. It was approximately 11 years. One of his primary goals as a Secretary of Education was to establish a common school system within the state, as well as teacher education and the preparation for their duties within the classrooms. He also emphasized the need to improve the physical conditions of the schoolhouses themselves. Before that time, for over 150 years, schools had been available but were ran by local communities and usually reflected the customs, beliefs, and religious overtones of the community in which they were located. Also, during the 1800s, there were three major changes occurring in the newly formed United States of America. First, there was a large influx of immigrants into the country, primarily from Europe at that time, and mostly Irish. Secondly, there was a significant westward expansion beyond the Appalachian Mountains. People were moving away from the coast and exploring further into the continent and for new opportunities and a new way of life. And thirdly, the country was rapidly moving away from the predominantly agricultural society to a manufacturing and an urbanization society. Mann felt that it was imperative at that time for the common educational system to be implemented in order to unify the nation. During his tenure as secretary, he looked to other nations and their educational systems. One that he was particularly impressed with and eventually based his proposed system on was the Prussian system. He liked many aspects of this system, but some of the main points were that it was a state finance system that was free, universal, and compulsory for school-age children. The Prussian system also trained their teachers to be teachers. Mann also insisted that teachers be of high moral character and that they teach moral values to the students. By the end of his holdings of this office, he was a strong proponent of women filling the role of teachers over men. This was in part due to the fact that he felt they could work with the young people a lot better, and in part because of the societal tendencies at that time that women were paid less than men, and this would be more economical for the state-funded schools. Many aspects of the Mann era schools are still in place in schools across the United States today. Even though there were several aspects of his original systems that by today's standards would be considered biased, discriminatory, and unfair, many of those were a product of the way society viewed things at that time. And some were just areas that he was blinded by his own beliefs and upbringing. The involvement of the government during the Mann era consisted of that initial configuration of school systems, the rules, regulations, and policies for the operation of them, and the funding involved for their operation. In comparison and contrast with today's government involvement, as I said before, there is much that can still be seen in today's system that was put into place in the early 1800s. but as the country evolved and society standards have evolved, many aspects of the government involvement have also evolved. There are now extensive regulations and policies that aid in the education of special needs students, as well as others that provide protection from discrimination in the educational setting. This brings us to our second topic of today, teacher quality. In 1800s, the criterion for teacher quality was high moral character. In 2012, states are moving towards the inclusion of student progress on standardized tests as part of the teacher evaluation. Under this new system, teachers would take specific tests for teachers, and assessment of student progress would impact teacher evaluations. Teachers would be rated each year as either highly effective, developing, or ineffective. If a teacher is rated ineffective for 2 years, they could face dismissal. Those that are for teacher accountability feel that making teachers accountable would translate into marginal teachers leaving the profession, and therefore improving the overall educational system. Those that oppose the teacher accountability feel that it is unfair to tie teacher evaluations to test scores when teachers work with students with different abilities and skills. There are also those that feel that if teachers are evaluated based on how well their students do on standardized testing, then standardized testing will be all that will be taught in schools. And therefore a competitive atmosphere will develop between teachers, which would actually degrade the school systems.